Hello students, welcome back to part 2 of the story, The Rat Trap. But before I start explaining further, let's have a quick recap of part 1. In my first video, I explained to you that there was a rat trap peddler who used to wander from place to place selling rat traps made up of wire. Despite this business, the man could not earn enough. He was extremely poor and homeless, and sometimes he was compelled to beg or even indulge in petty thefts to keep his body and soul together. One day, this man was struck by an idea that this whole world is like a big rat trap. The world offers materialistic comforts or luxuries as baits, and the moment a person falls prey to the temptations, his life is ruined. Now, this thought gave him unusual pleasure to think ill of the people of the world in this manner. Why? Because they had never been kind to him, and his heart is full of malice and bitterness towards the people. Now one day while walking, it grew dark and it was evening. He saw a small cottage by the roadside and he decided to spend the night there. So he went, knocked at the door and sought the permission to spend the night. The owner of the house was a former crofter. Crofter is a person who works on someone else's land. This man was a lonely person. He was an old man. He did not have a wife or a family, so he was happy to receive a guest. Now, this man was really kind and generous towards his guest. The guest is the Rattrap peddler. He not only gave him the permission to sleep there at night, he also provided him supper. He gave him a big slice of tobacco for his pipe to smoke and even played a game of card called Joles in Sweden to entertain his guest. The crafter also shared some things about his life, the story of his life, and he told that now he was old and he could not do hard labor, so he had a cow that was his source of living, and by selling the milk of his cow, he had earned 30 kronor. Kronor is the currency of Sweden. But he saw some disbelief on the face of the stranger. So this man was so simple and credulous that he even brought the money and he showed it to the stranger. The money was hanging on a nail in the window frame and it was kept in a leather pouch. After this, they both retired to bed. They both slept. The next morning, they both woke up and went for their work. They went in different directions. But half an hour later, the rat trap peddler, he grew greedy and he returned to the crofter's house. He did not try to open the door, rather he smashed the window pane, struck his hand inside, took the leather pouch in which the money was kept, and he stole the money and walked away from there. After stealing the money, he felt that he should not walk on the public highway as there was a threat to his life. So he entered the woods or a forest. He walked and walked. In the beginning, he did not face any problem, but after some time, he realized that he had been walking around through the same area. It was a very big and confusing forest, and he could not find the way out of the forest. Now, this man realized that this time he had fallen in the rat trap of the world and he was caught. He was trapped and there was no way out of it. It grew dark in the evening. He could not find his way. Now there was danger in the forest. He was hungry. He was tired. He lost all hopes of survival. So he lay down on the ground thinking that his end is near. But as soon as he put his head on the ground, he heard hammering of the iron from some nearby place and he thought that there must be some mill nearby and there might be people there. So he braced up himself. he summoned his strength and he started walking towards the direction of the sound. Okay, now we will continue further. The Ramschow Iron Works, which are now closed down, were not so long ago a large plant with smelter, rolling mill and forge. The Ramschow Iron Works, which are now shut down, but not many years ago, it was a large iron plant with many different furnaces and for heating and for rolling the iron. In the summer-time, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slid down the canal which led to the large inland lake. In the summer-time, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows. Barges and scows are different types of boats. They are cargo boats. Barges are flat, thick-bottomed boats and scows are long, narrow boats. They were seen coming down the canal and then going to the big lake, carrying the materials for the mills. And in the winter time the roads near the mill were black from the coal dust which sifted down from the big charcoal crates. And in the winter time the road near the mill was dark from the charcoal dust that was coming from the charcoal crates which were transported there. So the factory was really doing well, it was really flourishing. During one of the long dark evenings, just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace, waiting for the pig iron which had been put in the fire to be ready to put on the anvil. Now, this is the time just before Christmas. It is winter time. It is in the month of December. The evening is really dark and long and cold. The master blacksmith and his helper, his apprentice, they both are sitting in the forge and they are sitting near the furnace. The pig iron is crude iron is put on the furnace to be heated and they are waiting for it to get ready so that they can pour it into the anvil to make iron blocks. Every now and then one of them got up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments, dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom, he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. Every now and then one of them, either the blacksmith or his apprentice, they would get up from their place, they would go near the furnace and they would try to stir the iron with a long iron bar. And the temperature inside was so high due to the heat of the furnace that immediately they would start perspiring or they would be full of sweat, although they were wearing only a long shirt and wooden slippers. In spite of the cold winter season, they were wearing just a shirt, but due to the heat of the temperature, they would start sweating. All the time there were many sounds to be heard in the forge. The big bellows groaned and the burning coal cracked. At that time there were many different sounds to be heard in the forge. Inside the big bellows groaned. Bellows are the devices with two handles which are used for blowing air into the furnace. So there was the sound of the bellows, then the cracking of the coal. The fire boy shoveled charcoal into the maw of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. The boy was putting charcoal into the mouth of the furnace that made a lot of clattering sound. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tile roof. Outside also the weather was rough. A strong north wind was blowing, and rain was falling heavily on the brick tile roof. So there were lots of sounds and noise inside the forge and outside. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith did not notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge until he stood close up to the furnace. It was possibly due to all these sounds that the blacksmith did not notice that a stranger had opened the gate of the forge and he came inside and came very close to the furnace. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light which escaped through the sooty panes. So they did not find it anything extraordinary or anything surprising. They were accustomed to this, that poor vagabonds are homeless persons. So such vagabonds, they used to get attracted by the glow of light that was passing through the sooty panes, coal powder covered panes. Some light was escaping, and by seeing the light, the wanderers, they used to get attracted, and to warm themselves and to spend the night, they used to come there in the forge, and to come to warm themselves in front of the fire. The blacksmiths glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. The blacksmith, he did not show any interest, very casually and indifferently, without showing any interest, nonchalantly, he looked at the trespasser. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rat-traps dangling on his chest. The rat-trap peddler was also looking like poor wanderers like him look like. He was very dirty, he had a long beard, he was dressed in rags, in torn, worn-out clothes, and he had rat-traps hanging on his chest. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded a haughty consent without honoring him with a single word. The Rattrap peddler, he asked for the permission to sleep there at night, and the blacksmith nodded. He just moved his head in a very arrogant manner without uttering a word. He did not speak anything, and he gave the permission just by nodding his head. The tramp did not say anything either. He had not come there to talk, but only to warm himself and sleep. Now, this man also did not say anything. His purpose was only to warm himself there and sleep at night, so he also did not talk. In those days, the Ramshaw iron mill was owned by a very prominent iron master whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. In those days, the owner of Ramshaw Iron Mill, he was a very prominent and remarkable and ambitious person, and his ambition was to export best quality of iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see that the work was done as well as possible, and at this very moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. He personally used to supervise the work, and he used to come for inspection during the day as well as night, and it was at this moment he came for his night inspection. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. So when he entered the forge, the first thing that caught his attention was this tall ragamuffin. Ragamuffin is a person who is dressed in rags, in worn out clothes, and who was sleeping so close to the furnace that steam was rising from his wet clothes. It was raining, so he was wet, and now he is near the furnace, so steam was rising from his clothes. The iron master did not follow the example of the blacksmiths, who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. He walked close up to him, looked him over very carefully, then tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. Now the ironmaster did not behave like the blacksmiths, who did not stoop down from their position to talk to this poor fellow, but rather he took interest in this man. He walked very close to him, examined his face very carefully, and since the man's face was covered with his hat, he removed the hat so that he could get a better view of his face. "But of course it's you, Nils Olof," he said. "How do you look?" And seeing him, he mistook him for somebody whom he knew, and he addressed him by the name Nils Olof. He said, "How do you look?" The man with the rat's had never before seen the iron master at Ramsjow, and did not even know what his name was. Now the Rattrap peddler had never met this man before. He did not know who he was, what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, He might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. But again he became greedy. He thought this fine gentleman, if he is mistaking him for some old acquaintance, some old friend or acquaintance, then he might help him with some money. So what did he do? Therefore he did not want to undeceive him all at once. He did not reveal his true identity all at once. He also started behaving like an old acquaintance, Nils Olof. Yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me, he said. He also said, yes, God knows that I am going through a very bad time in my life. You should not have resigned from the regiment, said the ironmaster. Now the ironmaster is mistaking him from a comrade from the army, a comrade from the army. So he said, you should not have resigned from the army. That was a mistake. If only I had still been in the service at the time, it never would have happened. He said if he had been in the service, he would never have allowed him to resign from the army. Well, now of course, you will come home with me. And he said, now I cannot help that, but still now you will come home. He invited him that you are coming home with me. To go along up to the manor house and be received by the owner like an old regimental comrade, that, however, did not please the tramp. Now, going to the manor is a big country house, and being treated like a friend from the army, this idea did not please the tramp. He thought it was not safe for him to go to the owner's house. So, no, I could not think of it, he said. Looking quite alarmed, he was very cautious and he said, I cannot even imagine going to your house. He thought of the 30 kroner. To go up to the manor house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into the lion's den. Now he thought about the stolen money in his pocket, and along with that money going to the manor house, it would be like putting himself in trouble. He only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forge and then sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. He just wanted some time and he wanted to sleep in the forge, and the next morning he wanted to go away from there very quietly and stealthily without being noticed by anybody. The ironmaster assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing, but the ironmaster thought that he doesn't want to come home with him because he is embarrassed. He is dressed in worn out clothes. Please don't think that I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there, he said. Elizabeth is dead, as you may already have heard. He said, don't think that I have such a beautiful house that you cannot go there in this condition. And as you might have heard, Elizabeth is dead. He is referring to his wife, that she is already dead. My boys are abroad and there is no one at home except my oldest daughter and myself. He said his sons are settled abroad and there is nobody at home except the ironmaster and his eldest daughter. We were just saying that it was too bad we did not have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help us make the Christmas food disappear a little faster. You know, in part 1, I told you the sub theme of the story is human loneliness and the need to bond with others. First, the Rattrap peddler, he went to the crofter's house, who was a lonely man without family, and he was happy to have a guest. Now, this ironmaster also said that he did not have wife, his sons are abroad, and his daughter, and he was alone. And they were saying that they should have some guest for Christmas. And so he said that you come home and celebrate Christmas with us. But the stranger said no and again no, and the ironmaster saw that he must give in. But the Rattrap peddler kept on refusing the offer, and at last the ironmaster had to give up the idea. It looks as though Captain Von Stall preferred to stay with you tonight, Sergeant Storm, he said to the master blacksmith, and turned on his heel. Sir, he said, it seems that Captain Von Stall, he is addressing the Rattrap peddler by the name. First he said Nils Olof, and he is captain from the army, Captain Nils Olof von Stall. Okay, he said to the blacksmith that it seems that he wants to spend the night with you in the forge. But he laughed to himself as he went away, and the blacksmith who knew him understood very well that he had not said his last word. And by saying this, he laughed to himself, he chuckled, and the blacksmith who knew his owner very well, he understood this is not his final decision. There is something else on his mind. It was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of carriage wheels outside the forge, and a new guest came in. But this time it was not the ironmaster, and half an hour had elapsed. Then a new guest came in to the forge. She came on a carriage. This time it was not the ironmaster, but he had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. Why did he send his daughter? Thinking that she had better power of persuasion. He thought that she would be able to persuade or convince the stranger because he could not. So he thought that now his daughter should try and she would be able to convince the man. She entered followed by a valet carrying on his arm a big fur coat. She was followed by a servant who was carrying a fur coat for the Rattrap peddler. She was not at all pretty but seemed modest and quite shy. The girl was not pretty but she was very humble, modest, and she was looking very shy. In the forge everything was just as it had been earlier in the evening. The master blacksmith and his apprentice still sat on their bench, and iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The scene inside the forge was as it was in the evening. Nothing had changed. The blacksmith and his apprentice, they were sitting on their places, and iron and charcoal was still glowing on the furnace. The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of pig iron under his head and his hat pulled down over his eyes. Now the stranger, the Rattrap peddler, he had comforted himself. He was lying on the floor. He had kept a piece of pig iron, crude iron, under his head as pillow, and he had covered his eyes with his hat. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his hat. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. The girl, she went close to the man. She lifted the hat from his face, and it appeared that the Rattrap peddler was in the habit of sleeping with one eye open. One eye open meaning always he was very cautious and alert, and he always had a very light sleep. No, he was a thief, so he always had a fear in his heart. So he jumped up abruptly. All of a sudden, he stood up and he was looking really scared, frightened. My name is Edla Wilmanson, said the young girl. My father came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forge tonight, and then I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I'm so sorry, Captain, that you're having such a hard time. The girl introduced herself. She said her name was Edla Wilmanson, and then she narrated that her father returned home and told about this person, and she has taken the permission of her father and she has come to invite him home. And she also expressed sympathy that the man was going through a hard time in his life. She looked at him compassionately with her heavy eyes, and then she noticed that the man was afraid. She looked at this man with kindness and compassion, but she observed that the man looked really afraid and scared. Either he has stolen something or else he escaped from jail, she thought, and added quickly, you may be sure, Captain, that you will be allowed to leave us just as freely as you came. Only please stay with us over Christmas Eve. The girl, she is more practical than her father. She is more observant. She could, by seeing the demeanor of this person, she could understand that either this man has stolen something or he has escaped from prison. So she spoke to the man very kindly and she gave this assurance that he could leave their house as freely as he came. She just wanted him to spend the Christmas Eve with them. She said this in such a friendly manner that the Rattrap peddler must have felt confidence in her, and she spoke in such friendly way that the Rattrap peddler also felt better. He felt confidence in the girl, and he said, "It would never have occurred to me that you would bother with me yourself, miss," he said. "I will come at once." And he said, "I never thought that you will take the trouble and come here to invite me. I will come home with you." He agreed to go home with Edla. He accepted the fur coat which the valet handed him with a deep bow, threw it over his legs, and followed the young lady out to the carriage, without granting the astonished blacksmith so much as a glance. He accepted the fur coat which valet had brought for him, and then he put it on his legs and started walking behind the lady towards the carriage, without even giving a look to the surprised, shocked blacksmiths. They could not expect that this poor man, he was the guest of their owner, and the owner's daughter herself had come to invite him home. So they were just startled and shocked, but he also did not give them a look. But while he was riding up to the manor house, he had evil forebodings. But while he was on the carriage and they were driving towards the country house, he had such thoughts in his mind. He was afraid that why did he do that? Why did he steal the money? Why the devil did I take that fellow's money? He thought, now I'm sitting in the trap and will never get out of it. He's feeling guilty for stealing the money. He's regretting that I should not have stolen the money. Now I'm in the trap and there's no way out of it. So today, children, I will stop here. I hope this part is clear to you. See you in the next part. Thank you.